For quite some time, I've been very interested in looking at the way how our brains actually shape the way we see the world, not just in the obvious sense, but in a much deeper way. There's the old myth that the left brain is logical and the right brain is creative, but that's probably way too simplistic. And the real story is much more interesting and even connects with things that I've learned through Buddhist meditation. So I came across this idea actually from Jordan Peterson. He looks at the story of Cain and Abel more than just as a Bible story. Cain feels like the victim, he's bitter and resentful, and he frames the world in terms of oppressors and oppressed. And Peterson says that this way of thinking, dividing everything into victims and victimizers, has become a kind of algorithm of our culture. It's powerful because it explains a lot, but it also oversimplifies everything. Marriage, economics, history, and so on. It's all reduced to this one lens. And then there's this idea that if you side with the oppressed, then you get to feel more moral. And you don't have to think too hard about the complexity of the reality, because as we know, reality is often much more nuanced and complex. And this ties into what the psychiatrist and neuroscientist, where he studies the brain, Iain McGilchrist, talks about. He talks about how the left hemisphere loves simplification. It likes to grab onto theories, make categories, and it wants things to be neat and certain. It wants everything in nice, neat little boxes. And the right hemisphere is much more about context, nuance, lived in experience, relationships, intuition, gut feeling, embodied experience. And it's the part of the brain that sees the whole picture rather than just the fragments of truth or just the details. And McGilchrist points out that our culture often emphasizes, privileges the left hemisphere's way of knowing, especially in our education system. It tends to emphasize theory over experience, categories over relationships, control over openness. And that means we lose touch with our intuition, with our in essence, with ourselves, with the kind of richness, tapestry of life. And life, as we know, is quite messy. And the irony is that the left hemisphere feels really rational and down to earth. We're very rational, intellectual people, but it's actually more prone to anger, rigidity, and even willful blindness. So that's why we can see there are a lot of intellectual people who on one level are incredibly intelligent, but on another level are incredibly stupid. So what's really interesting is just the other day I was listening to a Tibetan monk who I don't think I'd listened to him before, called, I hope I say this right, Tsoknyi Rinpoche. And he actually gave an example of the left and right hemisphere of the brain by using hand gestures. And he said in the West, in his experience, talk is from 8 years ago, that we are very developed on the left hemisphere, and he gestures with his right hand, because remember, the left governs the right. And that where he was from, people were more connected with their life essence. So that's the right hemisphere of the brain, symbolized by the left hand. And that in the West, we need to find more of our essence. We need to bring the left and the right together. So it's not like we need one or the other. We need the two. And this is the Namaste. This is what it symbolizes, coming to wholeness, the left and the right. And this is where the wisdom is. Not left, not right. The two together. Namaste.